No one remembered the exact moment. They stopped seeing her as a person. It had not happened all at once. It had happened the way a fire dies, not in one breath, but in 100 small ones. First the whispers in the corridors, then the empty seat beside her at pack meals. Then the morning her own father signed the exile decree and slid it across the table without once lifting his eyes to her face. Her name was Elindra. She had been cast out of 3 packs before she turned 20. This morning, she was being cast out of her 4th. The sky above Ironville territory was the color of old ash. She knelt in the mud at the pack's edge while the council arranged itself in a half-circle above her, boots polished, expressions arranged into the kind of careful blankness that meant the verdict had been decided long before the ceremony began. She kept her hands flat against her thighs. She had learned, after the second exile, not to let them shake. Head Elder Draven began. He spoke the way men read from ledgers without weight, without looking at what he was tallying. Elindra of no pack, you have failed for the 4th consecutive cycle to produce a shift. You have failed the bonding trials. You have failed the blood rite. He paused only for breath, not for effect. You are, by every measure of law and tradition, something this pack cannot use. Around her, Ironville wolves watched, most with cool indifference, some with the visible relief of people glad the worst thing in the room was finally leaving. A handful, very few, looked at the dirt, but not in shame, just to avoid the discomfort of her face. She did not scan the crowd for kindness. She had stopped doing that after the second exile too. You will be stripped of the Ironville name, Draven continued. Given 3 days of supplies, escorted to the dead border. He folded the decree. You will not return. Elindra rose without being told. The council shifted. They had expected tears or begging or the kind of public collapse that would let them feel righteous afterward. She gave them nothing, just stood, brushed the mud from her knees with 2 flat movements, and turned toward the gate. 3 packs before us could not fix what is wrong with you, Draven called behind her, not cruelly, almost clinically. Neither could we. Whatever you are, no pack wants it. The gate opened. The mud pulled at her boots. She walked out. What none of them saw, what none of them had ever seen, was the thing that happened to her shadow in the moment the gate closed behind her. The light was coming from the east, clear and direct, so the shadow should have stretched westward, straight and simple. It didn't. It moved just slightly, like something beneath it had exhaled. She had noticed it before. She always pretended she hadn't. But this time, alone on the road with the gate shut and the laughter already fatting behind the wall, she stopped and looked down at it for a long moment. The shadow settled, stilled, as if it had decided to wait. She walked on. The dead border had no official marker on any map. It existed in the gap between territories, a long corridor of scorched earth left over from old wars, ground that had been burned down so completely it had simply refused to grow back. No pack claimed it. Nothing lived there comfortably. It was the place you sent things you did not want to keep. Elindra had crossed it twice before. The first time she had been 17 and crying. The second time 19 and silent. This 4th time she carried what she always carried now. A small knife, a list of survival rules she had written herself in the margins of a ruined book, and a name. Valdrek. She had heard it spoken in Ironville the way people speak of storms that haven't arrived yet, not with hatred, but with a reverence that meant this thing is real and it is larger than us. Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, sovereign of 7 united packs, the man who had ended the blood disputes that killed thousands, who had reportedly walked alone into a corrupted elder wolf, a creature twice his size, infected with dark magic, and come back without a scar while the elder did not come back at all. She had no reason to believe she mattered enough for his attention. But she had heard something else in those whispers, quieter, almost accidental, said between people who thought no one was listening. He's looking for something, something no one can name. She filed the name in the deep part of her mind, where she kept things that might one day be useful. She built a fire in the dead border from almost nothing. She ate sparingly. She slept lightly. Twice in the night the shadow moved. It reached outward from her slowly, like a hand feeling along a wall in the dark. She watched it with the tired attention of someone accustomed to things they cannot explain. "Not yet," she said to nothing. It stilled. She closed her eyes. Far to the north, in a tower of black stone above a keep that never fully warmed, a man stood at a window and felt something pull, sharp and brief, behind his ribs. Like a string attached to him that he had forgotten existed had suddenly gone taut. Valdrek, Alpha King of the northern reaches, pressed one hand to the cold glass and stared into the dark toward the south-southwest. "What is that?" he said. Not a question, a problem he had just been handed. People who feared Valdrek spoke of his silence before they spoke of anything else. Not his strength, though the strength was real and documented and occasionally legendary. Not his authority, though that was absolute in 7 territories and respected in a dozen more. It was the silence that got under your skin, the way he could stand in a room full of noise and make every sound feel temporary, as if it existed only because he had not yet decided to stop it. He had not always been this way. Hrothgar, his first commander, remembered a younger Valdrek, one quicker to laugh, quicker to trust, slower to close. That version had eroded through 11 years of governance and 1 war, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes with being the person every room orients itself around. What remained was precise, contained, and controlled in a way that had stopped being effort and become simply his nature. The morning after the pull in his chest, Valdrek sat at the head of his war table and listened to his counsel with the expression he had built and maintained for years. Present, unreachable, and giving nothing away. "Dead border incidents are increasing," said Hrothgar, who was built like a fortification and spoke like one too, solid, direct, no decorative language. 3 scout reports in 1 month. Something is moving through the unclaimed zones. "Rogue wolves?" Valdrek asked. "Possibly, but the energy signature they're describing," Hrothgar paused, and pausing was something he almost never did. "It doesn't match anything in the current records." "Unknown energy in unclaimed land," said Elder Morgaine from the far end of the table. She was a thin, dry woman who had served 3 Alpha Kings and had the specific authority of someone who has outlasted everything that tried to intimidate her. That is precisely how every catastrophe in pack history has begun. "Or it is nothing," said Lord Cassavin, Valdrek's cousin and the most politically cautious man alive. Cassavin had a gift for identifying the response most likely to preserve the existing arrangement and calling it wisdom. Scouts misread things in the dead zone air. We should not redirect resources toward ghost stories. Valdrek said nothing. He was thinking about the pole, the direction of it, south-southwest, and the fact that it had not faded since midnight. It sat in the left side of his chest like a low ember, constant and specific. His wolf, which was usually a disciplined and contained thing that followed his commands rather than generating its own, had been pulling against its own leash since the previous night. He had not felt it behave this way in years. "Send a reconnaissance team," he said. "Small, discreet. Eyes only, I want information, not engagement." Hrothgar nodded. Cassavin looked relieved. Morgan watched Valdrek the way she watched things she suspected were more complicated than they appeared. She was correct. What Valdrek did not say, what he would not say in front of this council, because a king who admits to things he cannot explain does not remain king for long, was that the pull had direction, that his wolf had already identified which way it was pointing, that the most disciplined part of him, the part that had governed 7 packs through a war and 3 political crises without flinching once, was currently engaged in a quiet and losing argument with the oldest part of him about whether to saddle a horse and go south immediately. He dismissed the council. He walked to the tower alone and stood where he had stood the night before. South-southwest, steady, insistent. His wolf pressed toward it. Not yet, he said. He was not sure what he was answering. In the dead border, Elindra had a problem. She woke on the second morning to find she was not alone. 3 male wolves by scent. No pack markings she could identify, which meant rogue, which meant unpredictable. They stood at the edge of her camp with the casual posture of people who have already made a decision and are waiting to see if the other party will make it necessary. The one at the front spoke easily, as if asking about weather. Lost little exile. She stood slowly, hands visible, knife at her hip, passing through. Through to what? Beyond the dead border there's nothing but more dead border, and then the northern reaches. He tilted his head. The northern reaches don't take exiles. I know that. Then what are you doing out here? Surviving, she thought. Resting, she said. His easy expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did, the specific shift of a person reclassifying you from a problem into an opportunity. We've been watching since last night, he said. You built a fire in wind that should have killed it. You slept in temperatures that should have put you under. He looked at her feet. And your shadow does something wrong. She went very still inside. Outside, nothing moved. I don't know what you mean, she said. Yes, you do. He moved. She moved first sideways, not back, changing the angle because she had been in enough situations like this to know that retreat was a signal. Her hand closed around the knife. He grabbed her arm. His grip was designed to hold. The warmth rose in her palm before she chose it, hot, sudden, involuntary, and the man flew backward without her moving a muscle toward him. He traveled 5 feet, hit the dirt. The other 2 froze. The warmth receded immediately, pulling back into her like a breath drawn in fast, leaving only the faint residue of gold fatting from her palm. Silence in the camp. The 3 wolves looked at each other, then at her. Then at her shadow, which had reached briefly toward the man on the ground and was now slowly pulling back. They left quickly, without another word or a backward glance. She stood alone in the dead border and stared at her own hand for a long time. 3 packs before us could not fix what is wrong with you. She curled her fingers slowly, feeling the last of the warmth fade. Maybe, she thought, nothing is wrong. Maybe they just couldn't see what they were looking at. She picked up her pack. She turned north, toward the northern reaches, toward the one territory she had been told would never accept her. She walked anyway. The shadow moved ahead of her, reaching, pointing the way. The border of the northern reaches was not a wall. It was a pressure, something that moved against your skin the moment you stepped across, like walking into deep water. Every pack territory had some version of this resonance, a territorial energy that welcomed members and made outsiders instinctively want to turn back. It was usually subtle, manageable. This was neither. This was the difference between a single candle and a forge. Elindra kept walking. 3 border guards found her within minutes. Fast, efficient, wearing Valdrek's black and silver and looking at her exile marks. The small, deliberate scars cut into her wrists, one for each dismissal, with the specific contempt of people trained to read such marks as proof of something unfixable. 4 marks, she had 4 now. Name and purpose, the lead guard said. Elindra, I'm requesting audience with your Alpha King. The 3 guards produced, almost in unison, the expression of people who have just heard something simultaneously absurd and slightly interesting. The lead one recovered first. On what grounds? She had prepared this answer for 2 days while walking through the dead border. Because I survived something out there 3 days ago that should have killed me, and I believe your king should know what did it. She did not elaborate. She gave them the shape of a secret and let curiosity do the rest. They put her in a clean, warm holding room, which surprised her. 4 hours later, they brought her not to Valdrek but to Elder Morgan, which did not surprise her at all. The old woman studied her the way a physician studies a patient whose symptoms don't add up. Not with cruelty. with the impersonal precision of someone who prefers to understand things correctly rather than quickly. 4 packs, Morgan said. No greeting. More exile marks than anyone I've encountered in 60 years of council service. Yes. And packs do not exile wolves without reason. What is yours? I've never shifted, Elindra said, flat, direct. She had stopped softening it. Never. Never. Morgan was quiet long enough that the silence became its own kind of test. And yet, she said eventually, you survived the dead border alone, encountered rogue wolves and walked away intact. Yes. Hell. That's what I came here to understand. Something moved behind Morgan's eyes, not warmth, but the specific attention of a mind that has just reclassified something. The Alpha King does not receive exiles, she said. I know. He certainly does not receive wolfless women with 4 dismissal scars who walk in from the dead border uninvited. I know that too. Then why are you here? Elindra thought about the shadow, the warmth, the 3 wolves running from something they could not name. Because I think I'm supposed to be, she said. She meant it without drama, the way you say something when you have stopped arguing with the truth of it. Morgan studied her for a long moment, then she stood. You will be tested, not because I believe you significant, because the way you fail will tell me something useful. She moved toward the door. The resonance circle is used to measure wolf strength. 3 bonded wolves channel pack energy inward from the edges. For those without a wolf, it is reported to be agonizing. They beg to leave. And if I don't beg? Morgan paused at the door. Then we will have a more interesting conversation. The testing chamber was circular, carved deep into the keep's oldest stone. 3 bonded wolves took their positions at the ring's edges. Elindra stood at the center. The energy poured inward. It hit her and met something. Not resistance, more like recognition, a conversation between 2 old things, the pack energy finding whatever lived inside her and instead of overwhelming it, leaning toward it. The 3 wolves at the edges faltered. One stepped back involuntarily. The energy in the circle changed direction, slowly, unmistakably, and began flowing toward Elindra rather than through her. She stood still, her eyes closed. Her shadow spread outward across the floor in all directions at once, fingers of darkness reaching toward each edge of the circle. One of the bonded wolves said something to the other in a low voice. The other did not answer because he was staring at the stone beneath Elindra's feet, where the floor was changing. Not cracking, not glowing in any dramatic sense. Something slower, a mark emerging from the rock as if it had always been there, burned there at the stone's creation, simply buried under centuries of use until now. Gold, ancient, a symbol none of them had ever seen outside of books too old to open without damage. The mark of the firstborn line, a bloodline so old it predated the formation of pack law itself. Elindra opened her eyes. She looked at the floor. She looked at the 3 wolves at the edges of the circle, who were all in various ways not doing well. Did I pass? She asked. The news reached Valdrek before Morgan did. Word moved fast inside a close pack, and a firstborn mark burning itself into the testing room floor was not something anyone kept to themselves. He heard it from a guard outside the armory where he had been sharpening a blade he did not need sharpened for the better part of an hour. He set the blade down. The pull I felt, he said to Hrothgar, who had delivered the news with the careful expression of a man setting down something that might be fragile. 2 nights ago, south-southwest. Yes. It moved north the day she crossed the border. Hrothgar was quiet. He was not a mystical man, but he was a loyal one, and loyalty had taught him to take seriously the things Valdrek took seriously. You think it was her, before you knew she existed. I think my wolf has been trying to reach something since midnight 2 days ago, and whatever burned into my floor when she stood on it matches the direction it was pulling. Valdrek walked toward the door. Tell me what the records say about the firstborn line. Hrothgar followed, thought extinct. The last confirmed firstborn was executed during the Ember Wars, declared a threat to pack hierarchy because her power didn't answer Alpha Command. A beat. She could not be controlled. And the bloodline itself. The oldest texts, the ones Morgan keeps locked, describe them not as strong wolves, as something older, something wolves descended from rather than belonged to. Valdrek stopped walking. He turned to Hrothgar with the expression of a man whose theory has just become significantly more complex. Bring the exile to me. The council will object. The council, Valdrek said, already moving, was not consulted. He did not receive her in the throne chamber. He received her in the study, the room he actually inhabited, lined with old maps and books that showed their age in the way books do when they are used rather than displayed. She was not what he had built in his mind on the walk from the armory. He wasn't certain what he had built, something more dramatic, probably, given what had happened to his floor. What he found was a young woman with 4 exile marks and the kind of steadiness in her eyes that is not born in a comfortable life. She looked at him without looking up, without looking down, level, as if she had calculated the exact amount of space she was entitled to and had decided to inhabit it precisely. He did the same to her. In the silence between them, the pull in his chest became something sharper, a key turning in a lock that had been frozen for years. His wolf, controlled and disciplined, and his, pressed forward once, toward her, and he locked it down immediately before it reached his expression. "Elindra," he said. "Valdrek," she replied, not a courtesy, a fact. "You know my name." "Names are free," the faintest pause. "It's trust that costs something." He almost smiled. The almost was real, which was more than most people ever produced in him. 4 packs, he said. Yes. No shift, no wolf form, no standard bond response in any trial. He watched her face, she gave him nothing back. And yet a firstborn mark burns into my testing room floor the moment you stand on it. I didn't choose that to happen. Things that are genuine rarely ask permission. He moved to the map table, not toward her but beside her, the way you approach something you want a better angle on. What happened in the dead border? She told him. Without decoration, without drama, the 3 rogue wolves, the warmth, the gold in her palm, the way they ran. He did not interrupt once. "Your shadow," he said when she finished. Her posture changed, not visibly, but in some quality underneath the visible, a bracing. "It moves incorrectly," he said. "I noticed when you walked in." A long pause. He watched her make a decision in it, something small. A door opened just slightly. "Since I was a child," she said quietly, "I told myself I was imagining it. Then I stopped pretending that was true." He looked at the floor between them. Her shadow lay perfectly flat and still, behaving, as if it understood it was being watched and had chosen, for now, to perform normalcy. He looked back at her. The firstborn bloodline, according to the oldest records in this keep, did not produce conventional wolves. They produced something that predated the division of pack power. They were not strong because they carried a wolf. They were strong because they were what wolves came from. He held her gaze. Which means every pack that dismissed you for lacking a wolf was dismissing you for the wrong reason. Something crossed her face, not shock, not relief exactly, but the specific expression of a person who has held a question for years that no one would touch, and has just been handed the shape of an answer. It lasted 1 second, then she controlled it. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because you need to understand what you are before I tell you what I need from you," he said. "And because I will not pretend I am bringing you into this keep purely for strategic reasons when my wolf located you before I knew your name." He said it flatly. No decoration, no heat. Just the truth, presented the way he presented everything, as information that was going to be dealt with regardless of whether it was comfortable. Her eyes moved across his face, reading him the way people read things they are deciding whether to believe. Whatever she found, she did not share her conclusion. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "To face something I could not face alone," he said, "and I need you to understand what it is before you answer." They called it the Ashen. It appeared in the oldest records as a symbol, a circle with its inside eaten out, meaning something like the hollow that spreads. Not a creature, a corruption, an emptiness that moved through wolf territories by severing bonds, a pack bonds, mate bonds, the connective tissue of shared loyalty that held communities together. When the Ashen passed through, wolves first became distant, then confused, then feral, then empty in a way that was worse than dead because the shell remained. Valdrek had gone to the first confirmed site himself, 8 weeks ago, against every reasonable recommendation. He told her this plainly, by firelight in the study, maps between them. He was the kind of man who told things plainly or not at all. 2 veteran scouts entered the outer edge, full bonds, full strength. They lasted 4 minutes before the corruption severed their pack connections and they lost themselves. He paused. I entered the center. I stood in it for 11 minutes. "How?" she asked. "I don't know, and for a man like Valdrek, not knowing was a specific kind of wound. It reached me and then stopped, as if it found something in me it didn't expect or something it couldn't process. I walked out. I should not have walked out." He pressed his palm flat against the map. "I have not told my council this. A king who survives things he cannot explain and admits it does not remain king." "And the scouts?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment too long. "The scouts did not come back," he said. She absorbed this. The fire moved in the grate. "You think I'm the explanation," she said, "for why you survived. I think the Ashen is old enough that conventional pack power doesn't register to it as a threat. I think the firstborn bloodline is older than the Ashen. And I think whatever burned into my floor when you stood on it is the one thing in the world that might register." He met her eyes. "I think you are the reason I survived that sight, not because you were there, but because something in my blood recognized what you were before you arrived, and it changed how the Ashen read me." She took that in slowly. "You're asking me to walk into the thing that nearly dissolved 2 of your best warriors." "Yes. On the theory that what every pack has called broken in me is actually the right kind of different." "Yes." She looked at the map, at the marked corruption zone on the eastern edge, at the slow creep of it, a bruise widening outward. "When?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression, not relief, but the release of a tension he had been holding without showing. 3 days, he said. "You'll need to eat and rest." "What preparation exists for this?" "None," he admitted. "You would be the first." She looked back at the map. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than her usual register. "My shadow has been reaching east since I crossed your border," she said. "I didn't understand why." She met his eyes. "I do now." He held her gaze for a beat longer than the conversation required. Neither of them said the thing that beat required. The political attack did not wait for them to reach the eastern border. It came on the second night, from inside the keep itself. Elindra woke from a dead sleep to a hand clamped over her mouth, and the cold, specific weight of a blade pressed flat against her collarbone, not cutting but present. A promise. 2 people, from the scent, pack wolves, not rogue, not outsiders, wolves who knew the keep's interior roots and had used them. "You will write a confession," the one holding the blade said. His voice was controlled, professional. "That you entered this territory with intent to use firstborn influence on the Alpha King's judgment, that you have been manipulating his decisions." A pause. "You will write it, and you will be gone from this keep before sunrise, and this will be over without anyone being hurt." She didn't move. She did the math quickly, 2 of them, one of her. A blade she couldn't dismiss the way she dismissed the man in the dead border because this one was pressed against her throat, and the warmth in her palm would not be fast enough. "Who sent you?" she asked, muffled against the hand. He removed it slightly, enough for her to speak. Too little for her to do much else. "That's not relevant." "Casavin," she said. The pause lasted exactly long enough to confirm it. "The confession now." "No." She said it quietly, without heat, the way you say something when you have decided and the decision does not require performance. The blade pressed harder. You are making a mistake. I've made 4 of them, she said. I've had a lot of practice knowing the difference. And then, carefully, she shifted her weight not toward the blade but sideways, just enough to change the angle, and the warmth moved in her left hand and she slammed her palm against the stone floor. The pulse of energy was not a weapon this time. It was a sound. It traveled through the stone of the keep like a struck bell, felt rather than heard, a resonance that moved through every connected wall and floor. She had done it instinctively. She had not known she could. The keep heard it. Specifically, the Alpha King heard it. Valdrek arrived with Hrothgar 2 minutes after the pulse, fast enough that they had clearly been close or sleeping lightly or both. The 2 wolves were still in her room. They hadn't run. Running would have been admission. The scene was not complicated to read. Valdrek looked at his wolves, at the blade in one man's hand, at Elindra sitting against the wall with a deliberate composure that he understood. In that moment, she had developed the way soldiers develop calm under fire, through repeated exposure to situations where losing it was expensive. He looked at the blade for a long time. Lord Cassavin, Hrothgar said quietly, reading the same evidence. Yes, Valdrek said, just the one word. Then he looked at Elindra. Are you hurt? No. He held her gaze for one moment. Something in it she did not fully read, anger maybe, but directed not at her, and something else she could not name, and then looked back at the 2 wolves. Take them, he said to Hrothgar. Hrothgar took them. The room went quiet. Valdrek stood in the doorway. She sat against the wall. The space between them felt different from how it had felt an hour ago, which had already been different from how it had felt 3 days ago when she walked in. You did not call out, he said, not an accusation, an observation. I have never had anyone to call out to, she said. He absorbed this. You do now, he said. He said it without decoration, the way he said everything that was true, and then he left before either of them had to navigate what that meant in the middle of the night. She sat alone in the room for a long time. The shadow lay flat and still around her, not restless, not reaching, present the way something is present when it is simply waiting alongside you. She slept eventually, better than she had in years. Cassavin did not come for trial. He came to Valdrek the next morning before one could be called, and he brought what he had clearly been holding in reserve for exactly the moment when he needed leverage. A document, old, authenticated by 2 elder seals. The firstborn compact, Cassavin said, setting it on the table with the deliberate care of a man who has rehearsed this moment. Specifically the clause that was removed from the public record during the Ember Wars. He opened it. Firstborn power, when in proximity to a mated alpha, exerts an involuntary influence on the alpha's decisions. It was the primary legal justification for the Ember Wars' execution. He looked at Valdrek across the table. She is not manipulating you intentionally, but she is manipulating you. Valdrek read the clause. He read it twice. His expression did not change. You sent men with a blade to her room, he said. I was trying to resolve this quietly. You sent men with a blade, Valdrek repeated slower, as if Cassavin might have missed the problem the first time. I was protecting you. You were protecting your position. Valdrek set the document down. The clause you are citing was removed from the public record because it was false, fabricated during the Ember Wars to justify an execution that 3 council members afterward admitted was political, not protective. He held Cassavin's eyes. I have read the original records, Cassavin. Morgan has them locked. I read them the night after the testing chamber. Cassavin's composure cracked, just at the edges. You knew. I suspected the compact had more to it than what circulates. He rose from the table. What I did not suspect was that my own cousin would send 2 wolves with a blade to a woman's room in the middle of the night. A pause. You are removed from the council. Your house retains its standing. You will not be exiled. That is mercy, and I want you to understand that it is mercy and not oversight. Cassavin's jaw tightened. If you are wrong about her, then I am wrong about her, Valdric said. But I will be wrong on the basis of what I observe, not on the basis of what someone who benefits from her removal tells me to believe. Cassavin left. Valdric stood alone at the table and picked up the document again. He read the fabricated clause once more, and then the two elder seals, and thought about the fact that the thing people had used to justify killing the last firstborn had been invented by people who were afraid of something they did not want to make the effort to understand. He thought about 4 exile marks on a young woman's wrists. He thought about the same fear, dressed in different centuries. He put the document down and went to find her. The eastern border on the 3rd morning looked like a wound that had stopped trying to heal. Color left the land gradually before the corruption became visible, green going gray in stages, sound muffling, the living smell of soil giving way to something flat and cold and wrong. The horses refused at half a mile out. The wolves in the scouting party pressed close without being told, instinctively consolidating their bonds against the pull of dissolution they could feel ahead. Elindra felt none of that. She felt the hum, deep, subsonic, beneath her feet, as if the earth had recognized a frequency and was vibrating toward it. The shadow stretched forward. Valdric rode beside her and said little. He was a man who became still before something dangerous, who spent less energy the closer he got to a real threat rather than more. She had noticed this about him and found it, privately, one of the most honest things about him. Anyone could perform bravery at a distance. It starts half a mile ahead, he said. The corruption will try to find your bonds and sever them. I don't have conventional bonds to sever, she said. He glanced at her. I don't know if that makes this easier or harder. They dismounted at the edge. Hrothgar and 2 scouts held position with the horses. Valdric looked at her, a direct, held look, the kind that has something behind it that the speaker has decided not to say. You don't have to go first, he said. I know, she said, and walked forward. The corruption was not dramatic up close. It sat in the air like a wrong note, not dark, not loud, just off. She felt it probe her, looking for the threads it could pull. Finding nothing to pull, it found instead what was actually there. The warmth rose in her chest without warning, not gradually, but all at once, like a furnace door opening. The shadow spread beneath her feet, and where it moved across the corrupted ground, the wrongness went quiet, not healed, silenced. She walked deeper. Valdric followed. The center of the corruption was a clearing with 3 bone-white trees standing in a triangle, their color leached to nothing. Between them the ashen turned, a slow, dark whirlpool of absence. She felt it pull at the edges of her, not at her bonds, at her. She planted her feet. The warmth flooded outward through her chest, through her palms, through the soles of her feet and into the shadow that connected her to the ground, and the ashen stopped turning. Not slowing, stopping, like a wheel someone had seized. Silence complete, the flat metallic air paused. Then the ashen pushed back. Not pain, dissolution. An attempt to unmake her edges, to find the seams in what she was and pull them apart. She felt herself going thin in places, felt the darkness probing for gaps, and realized with cold clarity that this sight was stronger than anything the 3 rogue wolves in the dead border had prepared her for. She was losing ground. A hand closed around her wrist. Valdric. He had walked into the center beside her, and his grip was around her wrist, not pulling, not directing, just contact. His pack bond moved against her side like a current, and the warmth in her chest found something to push against, found an anchor and deepened. The ashen pressed harder. She stopped fighting it. She opened toward it instead, instinct older than choice. The same instinct that had made her stop running from her own shadow. She opened, and what moved out of her was not a shield but something older, an acknowledgement, an origin recognizing a corruption and saying, plainly, you do not belong here and I do. The ashen broke. Quietly, completely. The dark turning unspooled and was gone. The ground beneath her feet pulsed once, gold, brief in color, began creeping back into the earth in slow, spreading threads. She stood in the clearing and breathed. His hand was still on her wrist. She became aware of it at the same moment he did. He did not release her immediately, and she did not move, and in the silence after the ashen's dissolution, the pull that had lived in the left side of his chest since the dead boarder was no longer a distant thing. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "Still standing," he said. "So are you," she said. His thumb pressed, almost imperceptibly, against her pulse. She felt it the way you feel a single note struck clearly in a quiet room, small in size, disproportionate in impact. He released her wrist. The controlled man reassembled, visibly in layers. "The corruption is cleared," he said. "From this site," she said, "there are others. 6 confirmed, possibly more." She looked at the trees, their roots already showing the ghost of returning color. "Then we have work to do," she said. He looked at her for a beat that lasted longer than the words required. "Yes," he said, "we do." The second ashen site was larger. The third was older. By the fourth, they had developed a rhythm, a way of moving through the corrupted zones that was part method and part something that had no name yet, a coordination between her warmth and his bond energy that made both stronger than either was alone. By the fifth site, Elindra knew something was wrong before they arrived. "This one is different," she said, 3 miles out. The hum beneath her feet was wrong, not reaching toward her but pushing back, a resistance she had not felt in the others. "How different?" Rothger asked. "The others recognized me," she said carefully. "This one knows I'm coming." They entered anyway. There were no other options. The corruption was spreading, and every day they delayed was another stretch of bonded wolves losing themselves at the edges. The clearing at the fifth site was wrong from the moment they stepped into it. The ashen here was not a slow turning. It was a pressure, directed, intentional, bearing down from all sides at once. She walked to the center and opened toward it, the same way she had opened in the 4 sites before. It did not break. It answered. The warmth flooded outward and the ashen met it and pushed, and for the first time since the dead boarder she felt genuine fear, not of dying but of losing herself, of the dissolution reaching far enough to unravel the thread of who she was. She pushed harder. The ashen pushed harder. The shadow beneath her feet flickered, which it had never done, going in and out like a light in wind. "Elindra," Valdrick's voice from her left. She could not answer. She was spending everything on the push. He stepped up beside her. She felt his hand move to the back of her neck, not romantically, not gently, but with the specific grip of someone steadying a person who is about to fall, and his pack bond surged outward from him and wrapped around her warmth like a second wall. The ashen hit the combined force, and for one stretched, terrible moment nothing moved. Then it retreated. Not broke, retreated, withdrew to the edges of the clearing with the specific quality of something that has decided to wait rather than lose. She came back into herself in stages like a limb waking up, pins and needles clarity returning from the edges inward. She was on one knee. She didn't know when that had happened. Valdrick crouched beside her. His hand moved from her neck to her shoulder, and his face was doing something she had not seen it do before, stripped of the precision, of the control, briefly and fully open in a way that was more revealing than anything he had ever said. "Look at me," he said. She did. "You're here," he said. "You're still here." "I know," she said. Her voice was rough. "Did it break?" A pause. "No," he said. "It retreated." She absorbed this. "That's never happened before." "I know. It means this site is different, stronger. It means the corruption has," she stopped, understanding arriving. "It's been growing intentionally. Someone has been feeding it." The clearing held the particular silence of an answer no one wanted to be right about. The Northern Council, Rothgar said from the tree line, his voice careful. There are two elder families in the records who opposed the original Firstborn Compact, who have holdings in the corrupted zones. He paused. It would explain why the Ashen spread faster after your arrival was known. Because they wanted to remove her before she could stop it. Because the Ashen, to someone with enough old knowledge and old hatred, was not a disaster to be stopped. It was a weapon to be aimed. She sat in the clearing of the fifth site with the retreated Ashen pressing at the edges and understood, fully and finally, that this had never simply been about what she was. It had been about who benefited from what she wasn't allowed to become. Valdrek's hand was still on her shoulder. She became aware of it consciously for the first time, steady, present, not letting go. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He helped her up anyway. They rode back to the keep that night and Valdrek called the full Northern Council for the following morning. He did not tell them why. He did not tell Elindra his plan either, which meant she woke to the sound of arriving wolves from 4 neighboring territories, and understood immediately that something larger was in motion. Morgan found her in the corridor. The old woman was moving with a purpose Elindra had not seen in her before, faster, sharper. She pressed a folded document into Elindra's hands without preamble. "Read this before you go into that chamber," she said. Elindra unfolded it, handwritten, old script but legible, 3 pages. "What is this?" "The full Firstborn Compact," Morgan said. "Unedited. I have kept it for 40 years, waiting for a situation that required it." She paused. "I believe this is that situation." She looked at Elindra directly, the first time she had looked at her without the physician's careful distance. "What I told you in your first meeting was accurate. I expected you to fail the resonance test. I did not expect." She gestured slightly at the general shape of everything that had happened since. "This." "You doubted me," Elindra said. "I was thorough," Morgan said. "There is a difference, and I am telling you now, go into that chamber and do not let them define you before you define yourself." She turned, stopped, turned back. "The 2 elder families Rothgar identified. They will be in the room. They know what is on those documents. They will attempt to discredit you before you can speak." "How much time do I have?" Morgan checked the window. 20 minutes. Elindra read the full compact in 17. The Northern Council chamber was circular, carved from a single stone formation, the floor set lower than the surrounding ring so that whoever stood at the center was visible from every angle. It was built for this, the display of truth before power. Elindra walked in without announcement. Every eye in the room found her immediately. Lords in their seats, elders in their raised positions, 2 men at the far end of the ring whose scent she now recognized, elder families with Eastern holdings, with old knowledge and older agenda, watching her with a careful absence of expression that was itself a kind of expression. Lord Edric of Stonemarsh, broad and calculating, who had arrived with 30 wolves under a diplomatic flag that everyone understood was not diplomatic. And Valdrek, at the head of the ring, not on a throne but present the way gravity is present, structuring the room around himself without appearing to try. He looked at her when she entered and the careful, controlled face held, but something behind it did not. She walked to the center. "By what right?" Edric began. "I invoke the Firstborn Compact," she said. The room went very quiet. The compact had not been invoked in 3 centuries. Half the people in the room had likely forgotten it existed as a legal mechanism rather than simply a historical document. "The full compact," she continued, "not the edited version circulated after the Ember Wars. The compact which establishes that a living firstborn has the right of direct address before any Northern Council, regardless of pack standing, exile status, or the political convenience of those present." She set the document on the floor of the bowl open, visible to everyone in the ring. "I am invoking it now." One of the 2 Eastern elders rose. "That document's authenticity is attested by Elder Morgan's seal," Elindra said, Who has held the original for 40 years? She did not look at him again. She looked at the floor. She placed both palms flat against the stone. The chamber had been built from one piece of stone, floor, walls, the carved seats, all connected, one continuous material. She understood this through the soles of her feet the moment she touched it, understood it the way you understand things that are beneath language. The warmth moved slowly. Gold light traced up through the floor from her palms, not dramatic, not explosive, but steady and inevitable, following the natural grain of the stone the way water follows channels. It spread in all directions at once, up the walls, along the carved seats, moving through every inch of the connected stone. And where it moved, the hidden marks emerged. Not new ones, ancient ones, carved by the first builders and buried under centuries of accumulated use until they had simply become invisible through familiarity. The marks of the original compact, the agreement between the firstborn and the early pacts. The agreement that predated every law being argued in that room. All around the chamber, marks lit up on the walls like stars appearing in a clearing sky. Every elder rose involuntarily. It was not a decision. It was the response of a body older than decision. The two Eastern elders had gone the color of old bone. Edric gripped the table's edge. Morgan, in her raised position, closed her eyes briefly, the specific expression of a person who has been waiting a very long time for something and has just seen it arrive. "The compact is recognized," she said. "The stone remembers." Elindra stood. She looked at the two Eastern elders. "You have been feeding the ashen," she said. Not an accusation, a fact, delivered the same way she delivered everything that was true. Using knowledge from the period after the Ember Wars, when the original firstborn was executed and her written records were seized by families who understood their value. You have been maintaining the corruption rather than reporting it, growing it. She let that sit. Because the ashen is the only weapon that could prevent what is currently happening in this room. One of the elders found his voice. "You have no proof." "The fifth sight retreated," she said. "The ashen does not retreat from pack power, it retreats from instruction. Something was telling it to wait." She looked at him directly. "The corruption at the fifth sight carries a human resonance underneath the dark energy. Morgan can confirm this, she's been in the record since yesterday." A pause. "Can't you?" Morgan, in her raised seat, held the room's attention for a single moment. "Yes," she said. The elder sat down. Valdrek rose from his seat. He did not make a speech. He was incapable of performance and had never attempted it. He said, with the weight of someone who does not produce words they do not mean, "The firstborn compact is restored to its full legal standing as of this session. The elder families of Gravest and Thornholt are remanded to investigation under Northern law. And Elindra," he looked at her directly from across the room, "is recognized as holding the compact's protection, which supersedes any pact status, exile mark, or council vote." He paused. "She has standing," he said, "in this keep, in this council, and in this territory." The room settled slowly, the way rooms settle after something that cannot be unsaid. The gold light in the stone walls faded gradually. The ancient marks remained faint, visible, permanent. Not everything was resolved in that chamber. Elindra had lived long enough to know that dramatic clarity in council rooms does not erase the slower, harder work of the days after. The two Eastern elders were held pending formal investigation. Edric departed with his 30 wolves and the expression of a man revising his calculations on the ride home. The fifth ashen site, the one that had retreated, that had been fed and directed, was revisited 2 days later with the information from the elders' records, and she broke it cleanly. The sixth site, the last confirmed one, took an afternoon. The work ended. The space it had occupied did not. On the evening after the sixth site was cleared, Elindra sat in the study, Valdrek's study, the one with the old maps and the fire, alone, because he had been called to a meeting, and she had become comfortable enough in this room over the past weeks to sit in it without asking permission. The fire moved. The shadow at her feet was still. She was looking at her wrists, the 4 exile marks, 4 cuts, 4 packs, 4 doors closed. She heard him come in. She did not move. He stopped when he saw her looking at the scars. He sat down across from her, not at the head of the table but directly across, closer than he usually arranged himself. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She was not usually asked what she was thinking. She considered the question honestly. "That I spent so long trying to be acceptable to rooms that had already decided about me," she said. "That I forgot to notice the one thing I actually had." Which was the truth of what I was, even when I didn't know what it was. She looked up. "I kept apologizing for things that weren't failures. I kept trying to shift, to bond, to perform the things pack wolves performed, because I thought if I got close enough to the right shape they would stop looking for reasons to send me away." She shook her head. "They would have found reasons anyway. The reasons were never really about what I did." "They were afraid of what you are," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "The firstborn mark in the testing chamber scared my council before any of them knew what it meant," he said. "Fear of what cannot be controlled is the oldest reflex in pack law." He looked at her. "It is also, frequently, the most destructive one." She nodded slowly. The fire crackled. The silence was the kind that has something building in it. "You held the 5th sight," she said. "When it was pushing back and I was losing ground, you didn't step back." "No." "You could have. It was the rational choice." "I have made 11 years of rational choices," he said. "Most of them were correct. One of them was not coming south-southwest the night I first felt the pull." He held her gaze. "I have thought about that one frequently." She tilted her head. "What would you have done if you'd come then?" He considered it honestly. "Found you in the dead border, 3 days into an exile, sleeping lightly with a knife. Offered you the border crossing before you had to walk in alone." A pause. "Not had to receive a firstborn in a holding room like a security concern." "I might not have trusted it," she said, "if it came that easily." "I know," he said. "Easy things rarely teach anything worth keeping." She looked at him for a moment. "You're going to tell me something," she said. "I can tell when you're building toward it. You go slightly more still than usual." The corner of his mouth moved. On a face that moved very little, it was significant. "You've been studying me," he said. "I study everything that might become important," she said. "Habit." The firelight moved between them. "The pull has not faded," he said. "Since the first night you were in the dead border. It was there before you crossed the border. It has been there every day since. It is," he paused, which was rare for him, choosing carefully rather than stopping, "the most consistent thing I have felt in 11 years." She did not look away. "I know I feel it too." "I know you do." He looked at her steadily. "I am not asking you for anything based on what it feels like. The bond pull is real, and I believe it is real, and I do not intend to pretend otherwise. But what it feels like is not the same as what I want to offer you." "What do you want to offer me?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was with the particular precision of a man who has thought about words carefully before producing them. "Time," he said. "Without the ashen, without the council, without a crisis that requires you to demonstrate what you are. Just time, in this keep, in this territory, alongside me." He paused. "And whatever you decide to build from that." She looked at him. She thought about 4 exile marks and every room that had sent her out of it, and the dead border and the shadow that had reached east before she knew why. She thought about the way he had held on at the 5th sight when holding on was not the rational choice. About the night in her room when he had said "you do now" and left before either of them had to navigate it. Because he understood that some things are not navigated at midnight. "You're still going to have to earn it," she said. "I know." Surviving the ashen together is not earning. Holding on at the 5th sight is not earning. Recognizing my standing in your council chamber, she held up a hand, is important, but it's also what should have been done regardless. Those are not debts you can collect on. I agree, he said. Earning is slower than that. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment. The fire moved. The shadow at her feet was perfectly still, not reaching, not restless. At rest, for the first time in as long as she could remember. Ask me, she said. He understood immediately. Will you stay? Not as the firstborn, not as the strategic necessity, not as the data that had changed his council's understanding of Northern law. As herself, Elindra, who had been cast out of 4 packs and had walked into the dead border and had learned not to let her hands shake, who had a shadow that moved incorrectly and a warmth in her palms, and a list of survival rules written in the margins of a ruined book. She breathed slowly. Yes, she said. Not from the pull, not from relief, not from the particular vulnerability of having nowhere else to go. She said yes because she had stood in the thing that should have dissolved them both, and they had not come apart, and what remained when the ashen was gone and the clearing was quiet was something she knew how to recognize after a lifetime of being denied it. Something real. Something chosen. In the days that followed, the northern reaches held. The cleared sites did not return. The remaining corrupted zones, smaller, younger, untended, were addressed systematically and were gone within a fortnight. The eastern territories began the slow process of healing, the severed wolves gradually recovering their bonds, the land recovering its color. Elder Morgan published the full Firstborn Compact in the Northern Records. She read the introduction in council with the brisk, unsentimental delivery of someone filing a corrective rather than making a declaration. 3 neighboring territories sent formal requests to receive copies. 2 of them also sent, somewhat awkwardly, letters of diplomatic greeting addressed to Elindra directly. She read them both, and then set them down with the expression of a person encountering courtesy from an unexpected direction. She was working on how to receive it. The 4 packs that had sent her away never formally addressed what they had done. This did not surprise her. Institutions, like people, are better at moving forward than looking back. She did not require the acknowledgement. She had learned in the process of becoming herself that the need for someone else to name what they had taken from you keeps you in the room where they took it. She was not in that room anymore. She had a different room now. One she had not been assigned to, but had stepped into and found sufficient. In the evenings, in the study with the maps and the fire, 2 people who had both learned that power without honesty is simply force, and that belonging without choice is simply captivity sat across from each other and worked, and talked, and in the spaces between, built something that did not need a name yet. It would have one in time. The night she finally let him sit beside her rather than across from her, he said nothing about it. Neither did she. He simply moved to her side of the table, and she shifted the maps to make room, and they continued looking at the eastern territories as if nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Outside, the wind came down from the ice shelf and moved through the old trees of the northern reaches, and in the keep's testing chamber, the firstborn mark on the floor was still there, permanent now, gold in the stone. A reminder for whoever came next, that the things which get cast out do not disappear. They go somewhere else. They become themselves more fully, and when the right door opens, not offered, not given, but arrived at through the patient and costly work of staying true to what you are, they walk through it. Not looking back. Forward always. Into whatever is real.